you've made a very public stance against community benefit agreements. And do you think they impact the COVID-19 economic recovery going forward in BC?
You know, my perspective on this is I came out through high school and I didn't have any family connections. My parents weren't those kinds of people who could say, we'll get you a job with our brother-in-law, or there's someone down the street who will hire you. I was on my own entirely to find my own kind of work. And, you know, through that period after high school, managed to fumble through and find things to do just by sending in applications. So it's very deeply wired in me that everybody should be treated the same way, that there's no special deal for a certain group of people. You do it on its merits and you earn your way. And in the construction business, of course, we know that there's the whole phenomenon of starting into the field and then getting the appropriate training, the apprenticeships, the skilled engineering roles. There's a whole range of activity in construction. And I like to think that everybody should have access to that on an equal basis. And if you're good, you'll get hired for the next project. And it shouldn't be based on whether or not you gave a particular political party a donation a few years ago. That's just wrong. I'm very much in favor of people being able to apply for any job they want and get it on its merits.
Interesting. Do you find when you're on the campaign trail, people kind of understand what CBAs are?
Well, it's interesting because they've given the CBA idea a funny name. We often call it union benefit agreements because that's where the money goes. But the general public are barely aware of this. There's been a saturation advertising campaign in British Columbia for 2 years now on the radio saying what wonderful thing community benefits agreements are. 90% of the population haven't got a clue what they're talking about. But people in the sector know exactly what you're talking about. And I was at an event in Revelstoke about 18 months ago, and people were talking about the Illecillewaet Road project. And for those listeners and viewers who might not be familiar with British Columbia, when you're driving from the Alberta border at Banff and Lake Louise through British Columbia on Highway 1, you go through the Rogers Pass, which has always been difficult terrain. It's fairly high up and very, very heavy snow loads. And the road has always been a challenge along with the railways. So the railways got through the hard part by tunneling, and the roads have been subject to improvements over the years. A particular section of road was bid out at, I think it was about $26 million and ended up costing in the 80s because of community benefit agreements. And the cost per meter, the extra cost per meter of road was $10,000 to deal with the union benefits agreements. So we said, you know, quite graphically, if you take 4 steps across the stage, you say, look, folks, that's 4 meters. That's 4 meters of excess road cost that could have been dedicated to getting somebody off drugs. That's how extremely expensive some of these UBAs are. And we think it's inappropriate to have British Columbian taxpayers pay excess prices for projects in order to satisfy the unions because they donated to the NDP in the past. We just think that's fundamentally wrong because the taxpayer is entitled to get the maximum value out of the project, and all construction workers should be eligible to work on those projects. Up in Revelstoke, a town of about 5,000 on the west side of the Rogers Pass, the people there are saying, why is it that we're not good enough to work on that project? The answer is you're not one of the NDP's favored unions, so you're out of luck. So they'll bring in somebody from far away rather than hire the local people. And that's just wrong. So we have said pretty clearly that just like the BC Liberals did in 2001 with a similar arrangement that the NDP had in the 90s, we'll say that any projects going forward will not be subject to union benefits agreements. They'll be subject to the idea that everybody can earn their own way, any builder can bid, and we'll see what happens in terms of the workforce, in terms of how they click together and work together as effective teams. That's the goal, and we believe in it.
COVID-19 economic recovery is a big deal for every jurisdiction in Canada, let alone worldwide. But do you believe as part of a COVID-19 economic recovery plan, new infrastructure commitments and investments should be part of that plan? Something like the new, like replacing the Massey Tunnel with a new bridge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's becoming very clear that this is going to be a very hard winter. If you're in Ontario, Quebec, you know that there's already a progressive kind of shutdown going on. In Europe, it's well underway. British Columbia has been relatively spared, but we're keeping our fingers crossed that we don't get the surge in virus counts. And what that does, of course, is slow down the economy. There are tens of thousands of people unemployed in British Columbia living on the federal payments. And they're not too happy because they're thinking, am I ever going to have a job again in the airline industry? Are hotels going to open again, or are they going to shut down forever? Will restaurants ever go back to full capacity? What does my future hold? That's a very legitimate set of questions. And one way to address that is to say, well, it's time to invest in infrastructure. We can keep our skilled construction workforce working through this. Government can borrow money at very, very low interest rates now. This is valuable infrastructure. So if you're not going to build it now, when would you? You've got the available skilled force, you've got access to capital, you've got a demonstrated public need. So on Monday of this week, we were out in Richmond and said, look, it's time to replace the 1958 four-lane Massey Tunnel with an appropriate bridge that was approved before the NDP came in office and canceled the project. You'll be familiar with it. There's 6 kilometers of preload sand still sitting by the side of the highway. $95 million was sunk into that project, and the NDP wrote it off. So our goal is to start that project immediately after taking office so that we can look forward to, first of all, solving the bottleneck that's the biggest traffic bottleneck in Western Canada. Secondly, getting people back to work. And third, making life that much easier for people on both sides of the Fraser River, because it's a huge traffic corridor. And you just have to go there in the afternoon southbound or in the morning northbound and see the lineups of trucks for 10 kilometers on each side waiting to get through that tunnel. That's ridiculous. Let's deal with the problem. Let's fix it. We've got environmental approval for the bridge already. It was already under construction. All the terms have been defined. There'll have to be the rebid process to get it going again, but it's clearly the only way to go, because the alternative that the NDP are muttering about is somewhere in the far distant future, putting 500,000 tons of concrete into the bottom of the Fraser River, one of the most sensitive salmon habitats in the world, and over the objections of the Musqueam and Tsawwassen First Nations, and they would drag them through the courts for a decade. So the whole thing makes no sense to put this tunnel through. We've got a bridge project that's been approved. It can be operating by probably 2025. Let's get on with it.
BC construction employs roughly 236,000 people, accounts for 9% of the province's GDP. Why is your party's approach and your vision, as it concerns labor and construction, the one stakeholders we report to should support?
Well, we believe that there's a very skilled construction workforce in British Columbia. They produce great product. We've seen what happens under a BC Liberal government, where you get the Port Mann Bridge, the Golden Ears Bridge, the Kelowna Bridge, the South Fraser Perimeter Road, 14 hospitals, dozens of schools, you name it, we build it. And when we say we're going to do it, we do it. The alternative is the NDP, who in their 13 years in power out of the last 30 have not built a single hospital, nothing, in spite of having promised the Abbotsford Hospital 12 times. When we got into office, we built it in 3 years. We do stuff. We believe in action, not talk. And as I said earlier, there's no better time to be building heavy infrastructure than right now, because we need the employment, we need the stimulus, government can afford it, and the public want it. So our view is, let's get on with construction on the things that matter. There'll be things like a new hospital in South Surrey. There's the, of course, Massey Tunnel bridge replacement, and a whole range of other infrastructure around the province. And when we're getting ready for this election, I basically said to our current MLAs, tell me what would work in your area. A couple of them, like me and another individual, said, well, I don't really need anything. I want the money to be spent in places where it's needed. That's the kind of thoughtful approach. Others said, you know, I could use a huge amount of infrastructure. And some said very reasonable things, like they're in pretty good shape, but they need improved bridge approaches on a bottleneck in their riding. Could they do that? I said, sure, put it on the list, because we want to build BC. In fact, you'll appreciate our campaign slogan this time is restore confidence and build BC. I think that probably resonates with your listeners and readers.